Strange Tales Told by a Dubliner by Turlough Conmee. Story number 10. The Dead Man's Tale. One of the things me father told me when I was a chiseler was that our family were descended from a clan of hereditary bards. I remember as a boy reading anything I could about them old bards. I knew that they depended on the patronage of the Gaelic kings and princes, and that they toured with their attendants from one noble house to another, from the southwest of Ireland to the north of Scotland. They were entitled to hospitality, which they would reward with poems of praise. If they didn't receive hospitality, they would avenge it with poems of satire. So the kings and princes would receive them, if only for fear of them blighting the noble's reputation. I remember reading them stories in a book me father had by Fearghus Mac Róich, who was an Ulster storyteller, still popular in the 1950s. One of the stories was the story of Guaire, king of Connacht, and how he outsmarted his burdensome guests and got them to move on. After my father died, I found that book again. Although there are several stories about Guaire in it, there's not the one I remember. So I've looked at other books, and now I can tell you that story, with a few elements from other stories and a bit of my own imagination thrown in. It seems the poets or bards of Ireland were gathered together to discuss what noble lord they should honour with a visit, when Seanchán, the chief poet of Ireland at the time, made a suggestion. Seanchán was always later known by the nickname Torpéist, because on one occasion he met a Torpéist, a monster, but that'll come later in the story. Anyway, Seanchán suggested that they all visit King Guaire in Connacht. Guaire was famous for his generosity and hospitality, and surely he would reward them for the poems they composed and recited before him in praise of him and his ancestors. No sooner said than done. They journeyed across the country and arrived at his residence. Guaire must have been somewhat dismayed to see what a large group was arriving all at once, but he welcomed Seanchán and his troupe of poets and accommodated and entertained them as they expected. In return, they recited poems in praise of him every evening. Yet they showed no signs of leaving. They'd been there for 6 months when Guaire's wife Bríd told him, "Guaire, these poets are eating us out of house and home. You will have to get them to move on, or we will be reduced to poverty ourselves." Guaire said, "Well, wife, what should I do to get rid of them?" "I don't know," said Bríd, "but we should send for your brother Marvin. He is a wise and clever man, and he's sure to think of an answer." So Marvin was sent for. He lived not far away, and had always provided Guaire with good advice. Now he arrived at the king's residence, and Guaire and Bríd quietly explained the problem to him. Marvin thought for a while. "What you have to do," he says, "is to ask them for a poem on a topic where they lack knowledge, or a story they cannot tell because they don't know the whole thing. If you do that, they will just melt away with embarrassment and never bother you again." Bríd looked at her husband. "By heavens, Guaire," she said, "it is true that every evening they entertain you with poems and stories, and they seem to have no end of them. But," she said, turning to Marvin, "how could we think of something they didn't know?" "These poets of the bardic fraternity know a few things," said Marvin, "but they don't know everything. There are ancient secrets, ancient stories they have forgotten. Often things that the Christian church these days disapproves of. I don't have much consideration for the bardic fraternity. Their supposed monopoly of knowledge is vastly exaggerated. And he laughed. What should he ask for then? Urged Briad. What would they not know about? I can think of one tale, the oldest tale there is. They never tell it. They've forgotten it. And what is that? Asked Guaire, now curious. Táin Bó Cuailgne. What is that one about? I think I heard of it once. It's the story of how Queen Maeve invaded Ulster and the battles that befell. Oh, that was a long time ago. Indeed it was, said Marván with a sigh. Long enough for these learned bards to have forgotten. Well, that's it then, said Briad delightedly. You can ask them for that, and they'll be stumped. They won't know what to say. They'll be off from here like a defeated army. Guaire was fed up with the poets battening on him, so he decided to put Marván's idea to the test that very night. After dinner in the great hall, Seanchán and several of his company rose and offered to entertain the king and his company with poems and stories. I would love to hear a story, said Guaire. Seanchán called forth one of their number, who was a professional teller of tales. There is one particular story I would love to hear, said Guaire. What is it? Asked the teller of tales. I know all the stories. I would like to hear Táin Bó Cuailgne. The teller of tales was dumbstruck. He only kept an embarrassed silence. What is the matter with you? Hissed Seanchán to him. Tell him what he wants. I do not know it. It was too long ago. I cannot remember it well enough to recite it. By heavens, neither do I, said Seanchán. Then he addressed his companions. Surely one of ye can recite it. They looked at one another and exchanged a few words here and there. We can remember snatches of it, they told Seanchán, but no one knows the whole thing. We heard it when we were children, but not since. It was all so long ago. What is this? Said Guaire wonderingly. A company of the learned, and you do not know such an old story. Surely 'tis someone you can ask. Seanchán looked at his group inquiringly, but was only met by shaking heads. Now Marván, the king's brother, spoke up. Shame on ye all, that ye have let the most ancient of stories slip from your grasp. I am going to put Gassa on you. Gassa were taboos, commandments or spells pronounced by a druid that must be obeyed. The poets feared Marván because he had old druidic blood in his veins. They believed he had the power. The first is that you must go and find the Táin, wherever someone still knows it. The second is that you must not stay more than one night under any hospitable roof until you have found it. Seanchán and his company of poets groaned. We will do as you say, he told Marván. Somehow we will find the Táin and bring it back and recite it here. May God be with us. The next day, Seanchán and his poets left the company of Guaire. As they walked along the road leading out of Connacht, they demanded of Seanchán, What are we to do now? It was your idea to visit Guaire and call down all this trouble on our heads. It seems only right that you should come up with a plan. You're right, said Seanchán. I will undertake to find the Táin, wherever it is. I will take with me only 2 men. And he pointed them out. Murgin, my son, and my cousin Emina. Where will you look? They asked. All around Ireland, he answered with a sigh. And if that doesn't help, we'll sail over to Scotland and ask for it there. Somewhere we'll find someone who knows it and can still recite it to us. Seanchán set about his task with his 2 helpers. They travelled Ireland for months, inquiring for the Táin, but to no avail. Then they decided to go over to Scotland, where there were many Gaelic princes and poets to be found in out-of-the-way islands and highlands. Seanchán asked the King of Leinster for a seagoing ship, and the king gave it to him in exchange for a praise poem. They sailed out of Clia, that is, Dublin, stopped in the Isle of Man, and went on to the Western Isles and the Highlands of Scotland. They were a long time in Scotland, but the search there was equally fruitless. No one had the Táin. It seemed to be irrevocably lost. One day, as they were crossing the Highlands, a strange mist came in and covered them. Seanchán knew that this was no ordinary mist, but a ceodriachta, an enchanted mist, which presaged some supernatural encounter. They didn't have long to wait. Out of the mist ahead on the mountain track, a monstrous figure came shambling towards them. It was about 20 feet high, and possessed an enormous shapeless bulk, surmounted by a shaggy head from which two blazing eyes looked out at them. It growled at them. With a cry of alarm, Miriam and Emina turned tail and fled. But Seanchán stood his ground, for he had a feeling that the creature wanted to speak to him. It stopped a few feet away from him.
Seanchán,
it growled. Yes, I am Seanchán, said the poet fearfully.
Do you know what I am?
It growled again. No, said Seanchán.
I am a Torpéist,
it said, which he knew was a kind of monster that travellers sometimes encountered in the wilderness. Seanchán said nothing, but waited.
And do you know who I am?
It roared suddenly. No, said Seanchán more fearfully now. I have no idea who you are, except a Torpéist. It rose up to its full height and extended its arms.
I am the spirit of poetry,
it roared again, and its fiery eyes flashed in its shaggy head.
As a spirit I have no earthly form, but it pleases me to take the form of the Torpéist.
Then you are the spirit of my craft, said Seanchán, feeling somewhat relieved. I and my companions honour you in every poem we compose and recite.
This is well,
growled the monster, seeming to relax as well.
Now to my business with you, Seanchán. You are searching for something, are you not?
I am, said Seanchán, feeling a surge of hope. I am searching for the Táin Bó Cuailgne, which has been lost, but I must find it for the sake of my whole fraternity, which honours you. Can you tell me where I can find it, and who will give it to me? The monster chuckled hollowly.
You will not find it here,
it growled. Not in the highlands or the islands?
No,
it said, shaking its shaggy head from side to side. Where then? asked Seanchán.
Back in Ireland.
How can that be so? exclaimed Seanchán. I have searched the length and breadth of Ireland and could not find it. That is why I came over here.
Only one man still knows the Táin in full,
growled the monster more softly now.
But he is dead.
Seanchán groaned with despair. Then all is lost. How can I get a story from a dead man?
You will have to call him back from the dead,
growled the monster. May God forbid, said Seanchán.
The Druids in olden times had that power, and used it occasionally when they needed to question the dead,
said the monster softly now.
Now there are no Druids left, but this new god you swear by, he can do it. His saints can do it.
What do you mean?
Go back to Ireland. Gather the most powerful saints in Ireland and get them to call this man back from his grave. Tell him what you want. He will not be very happy, of course, but you can persuade him to give you the story, since he is the only one. Then the saints can sing him to his rest again, and he will sleep again, the sleep that lasts till the world's end.
Who is this man? Asked Seanchán, when he had grasped the enormity of what was being suggested to him.
His name is Fearghus Mac Róich. He was a bard or a storyteller of the old school, the last one. His great-grandfather, also named Fearghus Mac Róich, fought in the battle that the Táin describes. That is why he knows the tradition. It was passed down to him. He knows every line of the Táin, all the prose, all the verse.
And where is he buried? Where can I find him?
He lies buried in a special place alone. It is at the top of the ridge called Undochdog in the mountains of Leinster.
I know the place. It is talked about in one of the topographical poems.
Yes, it is a special place, a wild place, a place where life meets death, where the stars of heaven meet the dark earth. Go there and bring your saints with you. They shall chant and pray to their God as they do. Then you shall have your Táin.
Thank you, Spirit. What you call upon me to do is fearful, but it shall be done. We shall have our Táin. The monster chuckled hollowly.
When you have it, do not lose it again. There will not be a second chance. Raising a man from the dead again would be unwise.
Now the creature roared with laughter. And he turned on his heel and disappeared into the Highland mist. Soon the mist dissipated, and Morgan and Emina returned. What was it? They asked. A fearful spirit that spoke to me, he said, telling me to do terrible things to get the Táin. But we shall have it. We have been enough in Scotland, lads. Our way leads back to Ireland. And so it was. They sailed back to Ireland, landing at Auchlia as before, and there they chanced to meet St. Callan, who was the half-brother of Seanchán, and a man renowned for his piety, though steeped in the old bardic traditions going back to the Druids as well. Seanchán inquired of him, and the clergy around him, who were the greatest saints in Ireland now. All mentioned St. Columcille in Derry, and others mentioned St. Finian, and St. Ciarán of Clonmacnoise. Seanchán drew his brother aside. I am asking for these saints to work a fearful miracle, Colin, he said. I told you I was looking for the Táin Bó Cuailgne, did I not? Aye, said Colin. And did you find it on your travels? I did not, said Seanchán, but on a lonely road in the Highlands I met the spirit of poetry, who told me that the whole thing was only known to a man who is now dead, Fearghus Mac Róich. He is buried here in the mountains of Leinster. And so, what of it? Said Colin, wondering. The spirit of poetry told me to have him raised from the dead for long enough to recite the whole thing for us. He said the holiest saints of Ireland could do that. Well, that's a terrible thing to ask, even of a saint. I know it, said Seanchán. If I could help you, I would do it, said Colin, for though he was a saint of the Christian Church, the old Druidic blood beat in his veins, and he knew the importance of this oldest of tales. But I doubt if my prayers alone could raise a man from the dead. Will you ask the others that were mentioned then, Columcille and Ciarán and Finian, to come to the grave of Fearghus and join with you in prayer. Surely the prayers of all four of you can do it." "Very well," said Colin. "I will go and ask them. Columcille will understand, for he is a druid of the old school, and a poet and a friend of poets, as well as being a holy man of God. And he can persuade the other two, Finian and Ciarán, if I cannot." "May your God go with you then," answered Seanchán. "I and Murrigan and Emina will stay here in Auclia and await your coming. And when all four of you arrive, we will go together to that mountain in Leinster. Then you shall pray over the grave of Fearghus, and God willing he will arise and speak to us, though I for one fear to look upon him, for he is long dead, it seems." Colin went on his way, and after a few weeks he was back with 3 holy men, Columcille, Ciarán and Finian. "God thank you all," said Seanchán, "and when you have rested and feasted, we will go on into the mountains and find the grave of Fearghus." In a few days a party started out from Auclia, consisting of Seanchán, along with Murrigan and Emina, and the 4 saints Columcille, Ciarán, Finian and Colin. Eventually they found their way to the mountain called Undochdog. There, on a ridge overlooking the valley, they found the grave of Fearghus Mac Róich. It was the most lonely, desolate spot that could be imagined. They examined the headstone, which was carved in Ogham. The bards were trained to read Ogham, which had been the alphabet of the Druids many centuries ago. And so Seanchán could confirm that this was indeed the grave they were looking for. They set up a camp for themselves in the shelter of an overhanging rock about half a mile away. The next morning at dawn, they returned to the grave. The saints took up their positions, Columcille at the head of it, Finian on the left side, Ciarán on the right side, and Colin at the foot. They held lighted candles in their hands, and so they began to pray. Seanchán and his companions left them to it and returned to camp. They stayed there all day. And that was how it was for 3 days and 3 nights. Seanchán and others sat around the campfire, and they could just hear the chanting of the 4 holy men, carried to them on the wind. On the 3rd evening, just after dark, a great mist enveloped the mountain. "That is the Ceodriachta," Seanchán told the 2 young men, "the enchanted mist. It is time for Fearghus to return to the world of the living. I will go over there, though God knows I fear what I will see. I will bring him back. Murrigan, have your writing tablets and your pens at the ready. Emina, stand ready to assist him. I will be back with Fearghus, God willing. Fear him not. He brings only good tidings." With that, Seanchán rose to his feet, picked up 2 shovels he had brought with him, and marched in the direction of the grave. The enchanted mist covered everything between the campfire and the ridge now. Thunder was heard overhead. When he got to the ridge, he saw the 4 shadowy figures standing around the grave. "Is it time?" he asked. "It is," said Colin. "God has heard our prayers. Fearghus lives. We must only dig him out." Seanchán began to dig around the grave. Colin took the other shovel from him and did likewise. The other 3 saints took turns at helping them. Soon the grave was open, and at the bottom they could see a white shape. It was the winding sheet in which dead Fearghus was wrapped. "Fearghus," called Columcille into the depths, "come forth, we must speak to you." There was a movement down in the grave, and the body of Fearghus turned and seemed to shake off the clay that was still on it. The winding sheet parted, and Fearghus sat up. His head and body were quite well preserved. Leathery flesh clung to his face and his limbs, and even his eyes were there somehow, glaring up at them.
"A mighty curse on the lot of you,"
he growled.
"Why do you disturb my sleep?"
Columcille leaned over the edge of the grave and said softly, "Nay, Fearghus, do not curse us. We have called you back among us for a while, because there is something we must ask you. It is something very important."
"What would you know?"
he growled again. "The Táin Bó Cuailgne." It was Seanchán speaking now. "The bards, poets and storytellers of the country have lost it. No one remembers it all. Only you have it. Only you can give it back to us again." The corpse chuckled hollowly.
"The Táin,"
he said quietly, as if to himself.
"It is true, it sleeps with me in this old head of mine. But have ye all forgotten it?"
"We have," said Seanchán.
"Fools,"
growled the corpse.
"how could ye lose such a treasure?"
"Only you can help us now," said Seanchán. "Forgive us for disturbing you. It was the spirit of poetry that told me to come and ask you to tell it again from beyond the veil of death." The corpse chuckled to himself again.
"The spirit of poetry, no less. Well, if I am thus commanded, I must obey. Help me out of this hole."
He reached up his skeletal arms, and Seanchán and his brother Colin, after shrinking back in horror at first, reached in and helped him to his feet, though the cold of his bones made their teeth chatter. They waited while he gathered the winding sheet around him. Then they braced themselves on either side of the grave and lifted him out, so that he stood among them, glaring at them still. The 4 saints now stood aside and sat down, exhausted as they were by their long vigil. "Fearghus," said Seanchán, "come with me a little way, and you can sit at our campfire and recite the tale. I have companions skilled in the arts of writing who will take it down word for word." Fearghus nodded, and the 2 of them set off. The enchanted mist gathered close around them, so that Seanchán had to pick his way carefully, but soon they saw the welcome light of the campfire before them. The mist went with them and gathered around the camp. "Morgan, Emina," called Seanchán, "I am back, and I have Fearghus with me. Fear not." Yet when the 2 of them walked into the light of the campfire, and the 2 young men saw Fearghus, they cried out in alarm and almost took to their heels in the darkness.
"Fools,"
growled Fearghus.
"what ails ye? Have ye never seen a dead man?"
"Oh yes," said Morgan, his voice trembling, "but not one that has been years in the grave."
"Well, I am as you see me,"
said Fearghus with a chuckle.
"As men grow older, they look the worse for it, and in the grave they look the worse still."
"Come now, Fearghus," said Seanchán. "Sit yourself down at the fire, and you can talk to us." Fearghus gathered his winding sheet around him and sat down. Great was the horror of the 3 living men as they beheld the dead man in all his hideous decay. Fearghus looked from one to the other, chuckling hollowly as he measured the effect he was having on them.
"Well then,"
he said finally,
"how are we to proceed?"
I want you to tell the story to me as your audience, Fearghus, and I will listen to your every word. Emina will repeat each line you say for Muirgin to make sure no word is lost, and then Muirgin will write it down on his tablets, for my son is skilled in writing. Just, I pray you, take your time and recite the story slowly, so that he has time to get it down, for you know the tongue wags faster than the pen can scratch. Fearghus grinned horribly at Seanchán.
Even a dead man's tongue,
he guffawed. And so it began.
Fechtnéan de alil agus de mév, nergod a riplig dóibh, grúchan ra Connacht, arcim córad chin cercili atarham. Fier blier a Indian bar alil, is mah ben dagfil, mahom barin dingen, kinti atá latsoon.
Fearghus recited the Táin, both prose and verse, unhesitatingly, and he got used to the murmur of Emina repeating his words, and the scratch of the pen as Muirgin took them down by the light of the campfire. They would go on like this for an hour or two, then they would pause in silence for a while, and finally start again. In this manner, they took all night and all the day to finish the recital. At the end, Fearghus grunted with satisfaction and said to them,
That is all.
May God bless you forever for what you have done, said Seanchán fervently. And again, forgive us for calling you back from the other side, so that we might hear you once more, this tale from your mouth. It is a treasure.
Then you have no further need of me,
growled Fearghus.
I feel tired after that recital. I shall not recite the Táin again. That was the last time. Now you younger ones can carry it on.
Aye, said Seanchán with a sigh. Then let us be going, for we promised you that we would return you to your rest. If that is your wish, he added, have you no regrets about life?
None,
said Fearghus solemnly.
Let me sleep now, the sleep of the earth.
They rose together, and then without another word, the living man and the dead man left the campfire. Soon the enchanted mist gathered around them thickly, and it accompanied them along the path to the open grave near the ridge. The four saints were waiting. All done? Callan asked his brother. Aye, said Seanchán, all done. Now it is for you to do your office for him and return him to the world of the dead. The corpse of Fearghus advanced to the edge of the open grave, and the two of them grasped him, shuddered him, by the bony arms, and lowered him into the depths. He lay there, gathered his winding sheet around him one last time. Columcille began a requiem chant, and the other three saints took it up, standing around the grave with lighted candles in their hands. Seanchán gazed down into the depths and fancied he could see Fearghus closing his eyes peacefully. After the chant had gone on for what seemed like a long time, Columcille said, Amen. And to Seanchán and Colin he said, It is finished. He has gone back to the other side. You can fill in his grave now. The two set to work with their shovels and filled in the grave. First, the white shape in the winding sheet was covered over with clay, and then the grave was filled up bit by bit, and they patted the clay down reverently with the backs of their shovels. The enchanted mist cleared from the ridge, and they could see all the stars of heaven twinkling above them. Let us be gone from this place, said Columcille to the others. Our task is done. They walked back to the campfire, and sat and rested and took refreshment. Murdigan showed them all the completed text of the Táin, as he had written it down from the mouth of Fearghus. Then they slept the remaining hours of the night until dawn. On the next morning, they marched down into the plains. Some time after that, Seanchán gathered the company of the poets, and with young Murdigan and Emina, he travelled westward to Connacht, where King Guaire received them, together with his wife Bríd and his brother Marvan. "We have fulfilled the gassa laid upon us," said Seanchán that night. "We have found the Táin." "That is a wondrous thing, Seanchán," said Guaire, deeply moved. "And pray, how did you do it?" "That, O King, I will not tell you, for it would freeze your heart and the hearts of all the company here if you knew. But just let me recite the tale for you now." Murdigan laid a fine copy written with ink on vellum on a table before him, and he began to recite from the pages. His voice filled the great hall, and the whole company listened to the story in silence. "Fechtnéan de alil agus de mév, nergod a rípleg hedóiv, grúchan ra Connacht, arachim córad chin kerkeli atarhu. Fyr blír a ingin, bar alil, is mah ben dag fil, mahum bar in dingin. Kid die ta latsoon. Is de ta lim bar alil erit ferso indu inda in la hukasahu. Bawashe remut mee. Is mah nach kolemal agus nach fetemal alil. Ach de vishu van tinkur mna agus bidba na krieg benesmdet. Og brecht de slat. Agus de grech je voortag ooit. Ní zou nooit base meid, ach meher in ordri eren. At the end of the recital, Guaire said, "We have heard a wondrous tale tonight." "All the more wondrous," agreed Bríd, "because you seemed to be sure that it was lost forever." "Well done, Seanchán, and all you poets," added Marvan with a chuckle. "You have brought the Táin back to us. It is like bringing a man back from the dead." A few days after, Seanchán took leave of Guaire with a poem, in which he thanked him for his hospitality and promised he would not abuse it again. And so the Táin was restored to Ireland, and it was recited and copied for as long as there was manuscript transmission. After that it was printed. By the way, it seems that Seanchán and his friends need not have given themselves so much trouble searching all of Ireland and Scotland to find it. Perhaps they inquired only among the princes and nobles, and didn't think to ask among the common people. But it seems that a version of the Táin was collected from a humble old fisherman in the Outer Hebrides in 1957. You have been listening to The Dead Man's Tale, by Turlough Con Me, from Strange Tales Told by a Dubliner. If you've enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, share and comment. And so, until next time.